Right. So here we see that China's investment in the U.S. is dropping rapidly from 56 billion in 2016 to less than a quarter of that in 2018. So, I mean, you can just see from that I mean, a couple of things really. First of all, that is one example of how the China bubble has popped or is popping. Um, Although it's probably has a lot to do with, I mean, all right. A couple of years ago, basically China was experiencing massive capital outflows, and a lot of that they did two things. So one of the things that they did was they clamped down on on individuals moving money overseas, particularly to the U.S. That's where most of the money was going to, anyways. And then the second thing that they did was they just probably by edict told the state-owned enterprises that they needed to invest less in the U.S. And so they did. And there's one other point along that regard, which is also on our side. We made it a lot more difficult for Chinese companies to make investments, and yeah, we just tightened up on that a lot. All right, so the second thing here, Europeans pose threat to Huawei. Yeah, this is just a small example. Obviously, there's a huge deal with the princess of the Communist Party having been arrested in Canada, which I do want to point out the significance of it being in Canada. I mean, that's more significant than if it was in the U.S. because it sends the message to high-ranking Communist Party members that you're not. It's not just that you're not safe in the U.S. There are many countries around the world that you are potentially not safe in. You don't even know, because this country could be cool with you, like the Philippines. Are you safe going to the Philippines? Well, probably depends on the very last conversation that took place between Duterte and Trump. So, anyways, point is though, I think a lot of what's going on, Trump is just sort of the in the lead in terms of leading this like movement of the West against China, and some people, particularly those that make the point about tariffs, that seem to think that tariffs are a really bad idea. They seem to think it's just Trump, and that none of the other countries are going to be following along. But sort of the discontentment with China and its trade practices has been brewing around the world for at least 10 years now, and so it's not in any way just purely an American thing or just purely a Trump thing, because Trump, once he raises these tariffs on China, and then once we get to the point where Chinese goods are actually more expensive in the U.S. than they used to be, then those goods are going to be flooding other countries. So the countries that are already having a hard time with Chinese competition, they're going to end up having a much worse time. They're going to have a harder time. So there's that. And then also there's going to be a lot of companies that choose to manufacture outside of China, simply because why would you manufacture in China if you like let's say you're exporting to Europe and America? Well, why would you manufacture in China instead of just manufacturing in another country where you can send your exports to both Europe and America? Why would you have one manufacturing facility in America and one in China, and then one in another country? It's for some companies it might make sense, but for other companies it makes more sense to have one, manufacturing facility, and so they're going to move that entirely out of China because they would like to have that one manufacturing facility be in a place where they can export to America. Okay, so another headline that caught my eye was um, Trump invective. What does it say? Trump invective feeds fears for Fed independence. Um, so so this is something that I've been expecting for a while, and I mean, a lot of just so much of what you see in the financial press about the relationship between the president and the Fed is just stupid. It's just not. It's just so obvious. I mean, like just recent examples in history of federal, interactions between presidents and the Fed show that it's not. I mean, they do have influence. It's not out of the norm at all for a president to attempt to exert influence. And it wouldn't be that strange if Congress made an act to take Federal Reserve independence away. And it also, it should weigh on the, supposedly, no Fed chairman wants to be the one that caused the Fed to lose its independence. And so when they're making their votes and they're like, well, I think we should raise rates, but I don't want to cause Congress to take away the independence of the Fed, so that they decide, all right, we're going to skip a rate increase this round. But the main thing here is that Trump should have, straight from the beginning of his presidency, he should have allied with Rand Paul and talked about, at least offered a little bit of rhetorical support towards the idea of auditing the Fed. And that would just maximize his leverage with the Fed. But, obviously, he's been slow. He's been slow with this. Now, I think one thing I definitely want to say is that I don't understand why all these articles are predicting that if Trump fires Powell, then then there'll be even more volatility in the economy and the stock market will just plunge, blah, blah, blah. That makes no sense. If he's firing Powell because Powell has been too tight, if that means anything, it means that Powell or his replacement or, if he can, what I saw was that he can fire governors. So it seems like he could fire all of the hawks. He could just replace them all with doves. That seems to be what I understand, but it could easily be wrong because there's so much conflicting information. I don't understand what the president's powers over the Fed is such a mystery to everybody. It seems like it should be pretty straightforward. But anyways, I don't see how that could be bad for stocks. How could that possibly be bad for stocks? It could only be good for stocks. The only other possibility is that it doesn't make a difference because he's like fired as chairman but stays on as governor and ends up being re-voted as chairman. That was one scenario I saw. But it can't possibly be bad for stocks. So why these people are just fear mongering? And it seems like there's a new circularity problem where usually it's the Fed is looking at the market and then the market is looking at the Fed. And it seems like now what we've got going on is that, well, I guess this probably always existed, but now it's like excessively intensified. I feel like a lot of what's going on in American media is people that actually think they can influence the president to do something, so their audience is not even the normal audience for media. It's just the president. And so part of, I think quite possibly these articles and people on like CNBC or whatever that are saying that if he fires Powell, then that's gonna cause the stock market to collapse further. I think they might be just trying to make the president afraid. That's pretty much the goal there. Okay, so the very last thing here is that from Zero Hedge, it's not just Trump. A Wall Street chorus is calling for Powell's scalp. So I really don't get Tyler Durden, whoever that really is, his analysis at the end of that article. But I would say that it's so obvious that Powell is making a horrible mistake right now. And it always makes me wonder whether or not that's part of a geopolitical strategy to maximize the pain for China at this moment in time. Because when we're crashing, that makes things more difficult for them, and they were already really wobbly. So if he's actually just trying to pursue an appropriate monetary policy, it's so far from, it's just so ridiculously bad. I have no idea how he could possibly think that it was a good idea to go this far in terms of signaling what direction things are going in, and not throwing out some dovish hints at this point. I mean, he has thrown out some, but come on, not enough. And yeah, and I don't really understand why it's taken Trump so long to react to this, and why he did such a bad job of appointing Powell in the first place. Really makes me question a lot of things. That's all I got to say.